and welcome to the Truth and Data podcast, where each week we cover a different digital forensics topic. I'm Jessica.
I'm Kim.
And I'm Debbie.
And today we're going to be talking about mental wellness in the digital forensics space. For me, this is a really near and dear topic. People don't, I think it's getting better than it used to, but I still believe that this topic deserves a lot of attention. And I come from the perspective of having lost a colleague to suicide directly related to the content that we witnessed as part of our work. It was a video examiner who worked with me in a counterterrorism lab. And I'm sure you can just imagine what kind of content we dealt with day in and day out, including torture of real people and their executions. And we often had to work those cases to understand. And I worked with an amazing gentleman who was actually the team lead of the video team, and I was team lead of the mobile exploitation team, or CELEX. And so I saw him every single day, and one of the most smiley people you could imagine, a father, a husband, was young, and he took his own life. And as sad as it is to see suicide, there's a part of this that broke my heart even more at the time, and it was because he was, like myself, a government contractor. So was not a member of the government agency, but a government contractor. And a lot of forensics examiners, and maybe many of you listening to this, do work as government contractors. And in that time and place, in other words, at that time and in that lab, it was policy that every government examiner had access and received mental health services, actually required, mandated, they had to, and it was prohibited for contractors to receive those same services. And likewise, because of the rules under which we worked, it was prohibited for us to seek external private counseling where we could actually explore the issues of the content we saw, because we could not speak about it because of the type of environment it was in which we worked. And as a result, we lost a very intelligent, wonderful, happy human to suicide because of this. So hopefully in this episode, we're going to discuss some issues. We're going to discuss resources. We're going to discuss all the positive things that are happening in our industry that have changed. And hopefully also give some real skills. So,
Jessica, can I ask you a question?
Please.
Did anything change after that? I know government in general is slow to change.
I love that you're asking this question. Sadly, in that lab, no.
Yeah.
I know that several of us advocated for this to be different beforehand. Several of us advocated for it to be different afterwards. I don't know now. Maybe there's been a change. Right. But at that time, my government lead, who's a fantastic person, I had interviewed him on a prior podcast, and he's actually now the CISO at Oracle Cloud, Rob Duhart. He was a govie there, and he was my government lead. And after we lost Jeffrey, he was a very, very, very big advocate to try to get that solved. And we were just hitting brick walls. Not that, and I'll tell you, some of the things that were said were pretty callous. Like, everybody signs a noxious content exposure form when they start. Okay, yeah, you sign a noxious content exposure. But I'll tell you, it's not just what you see. Like, and we can talk about strategies, but the things that killed me, I shouldn't use the word killed me. The things that really hurt me emotionally, personally, right? And so I imagine it is when we'd work cases where we would get proof of life, and then a couple of days later, and we'd be trying to locate or do whatever we were doing, and then we'd get the proof of death of that same person. And a lot of that is very it's traumatizing, right? These are the active
Absolutely.
cases you're working, and I had that on more than one occasion, and I'd say those were particularly traumatizing, along with everything else, right? Uh, I don't talk about my casework from that period, but there's one I can talk about because I received a commendation for it. So I don't know if folks remember this, but there was a terrorist group that had taken two citizens, and one of them was a Japanese citizen. And I have a commendation on this that is unclassified with my name on it, so I'm comfortable saying this one. And they set that man on fire in a cage, and so that's an example of the kind
Right.
of content that was part of my work, my daily work, which was very passionate about doing, and very passionate about helping this mission. And I loved the work. I loved the technical aspects of the work, but I really, we'll talk. There's all kinds of strategies folks can do, but I just really want to start this off by advocating that if your organization doesn't currently, if you're in an organization like mine where there is any number of people in your organization who have to bear witness to this content in order to stop future horrors, which is what we do, or to bring justice for those victims, then, and it doesn't matter if you're in major crimes, if you're in child sexual abuse, if you're in counterterrorism, all of that stuff is noxious.
Right.
But we want to give you the tools here to advocate for yourself and your teams, to be able to get support, so no one else has to lose someone else to suicide, or even just PTSD and the damage that is done by the work that we do. And so let's start there. So what are some techniques or resources or...
I'm going to say one other thing first. It's hard for me to believe that it takes something like what happened to Jeffrey for change to occur.
Change didn't occur though, Debbie. That's what I'm saying. That's even worse.
Right. So, and it's hard for me to believe that it didn't. Of course, we've all been government employees. Government moves slowly. In the organization that I was in, it took a suicide as well for them to take things seriously, and change did occur. But it is hard to imagine in what you're describing that they don't believe that everyone needs some form of support. It's truly hard for me to believe that the people viewing what you were viewing wouldn't need some extra support. And that something like these things happen before leadership says, oh, maybe we should do something for them.
And you know what? I'll say another issue was that there were no... So, okay, maybe we're not going to give counseling, but why aren't we giving strategies, right?
Yes, resiliency strategies, coping
all of
skills.
The resiliency and coping strategies that at that time, like since then I've worked in other environments, so I just want to clarify. And I know when I went to Magnet, I advocated for a policy for noxious content because I was working with the AI teams, and I realized just in some of the data they were using for training models back in 2016 and Magnet was awesome about it. Like, let me applaud Magnet. Magnet did not want any employees who work there having to deal with noxious content. But I, within a second of working with the team, realized that there was the opportunity for exposure and the potentiality for exposure. And I was like, well, we need to put some measures in place. We need to reduce exposure, and, and everyone there, I mean, from the top down, obviously, Jad had worked as an officer and knew
Right.
what it was to be exposed to noxious content. So they took it really seriously. So I've worked other places where it's taken very seriously and there's very good policies in place. But I've also worked places where there were no policies, no coping mechanisms. Everything was what somebody else had done. The things we do naturally, dark humor. But the yeah, I'm thankful that your agency was able to, and I'm sorry that
It started
you
a
as well had a
movement.
suicide,
Yeah.
but that a movement started, and I am happy to see such a movement and to see this topic on conference talks, to
Right.
see wellness features and tools, to see people sharing coping strategies, to see articles on it. But I'd say 15 years ago that wasn't happening.
Right.
So I'd say it's really in the last, I'd say 5 to 7 years that I've seen it really taking form from the industry. I'd say even 10 years ago, it wasn't happening. So I truly applaud the fact that it is. But yeah, so what can we do? What did your lab do, Debbie?
So, we did a variety of things. I was managing a work unit that had a budget, and, I was allowed to put wellness program things in my ICAC budget. And so that's what I did. And I was also able to use programs that the agency had built for my work unit. So, if we talk about my agency, we had a peer support program. And, later on in Georgia, the governor created the Office of Public Safety Support that had, mental health providers that public safety could see. And, so there were certain things going on. I took full advantage of those for the work unit that I managed. But I sort of developed something that, we were already doing check-ins, wellness check-ins.
What's a wellness check-in? Yes. I really want a definition of what wellness
Yes.
check-in is and peer is. And I do want to also say one other thing. It's not just the content you're exposed to. It's not just the people. It's also the stress. There's tight timelines, and I sometimes just that stress, the amount of cases, the timelines. Like there's all of these confounding issues. I know I started with some of the worst, but there's more to it.
Absolutely. And personal issues,
oh yeah, for sure.
Personal issues go in, compound all of this as well. So we would a wellness check-in, and what I define it as.
Yeah.
Most often across the industry, a wellness check-in is a visit with a mental health professional, and really what they're doing, they're not doing counseling, they're not doing therapy, they are literally checking in to make sure that you're doing okay. How are you sleeping? Are you, how are you coping with stress? Are you self-medicating, with alcohol or things like that? How are you handling viewing CSAM material? How are you handling viewing noxious content? How is your caseload? How are you handling those things? It's a check-in. And if someone needs assistance, then they are referred to someone that can actually help them, counsel them, provide them with some mechanism by which to cope with these things that they're dealing with appropriately.
So it's a screening
yes.
For folks who don't work in this world. CSAM's child sexual abuse material,
right?
But in terms of these screenings, I'm going to, and I say this coming from my background in the Marine Corps and in the DOD, I always wondered if this was part of the problem. So I'm going to ask your opinion. Do you think that some of it's almost machismo? Like almost like, I have to be super strong.
Of course.
That prevents that's caused a culture where these things wound up happening.
Yes, absolutely. One of the first things that you have to do, that a work unit has to do, or that a leader or an executive has to do, is create a culture where that is not the case, and that takes time. And we could probably do an entire podcast on how do you create a culture where it's okay to talk. but that is one of the first steps that you do. These check-ins sort of are just like it's a check-in. We started though with that, and I sort of realized this is not wellness. This is not providing them with any skills or abilities to cope with the stress. This is just making sure they're okay. So we started,
And what percentage are going to not want to be the one that had to go? Like, people are worried, is this going to affect is it going
they're
to
not
be
fitness for duty.
Right. Is it going to affect my fitness for duty? Is it going to affect, if they work in a classified environment, my clearance status? Is it going to get a mark on my performance evaluations? Is it going to get me kicked out of the unit? And I love this work, and I find this work meaningful and important, and I don't want to do anything else. So could this mental health provider get me sent back to patrol or back to, there's so
Those
many
are all legitimate feelings
that people have around it. So did you find in your organization that leadership took specific proactive steps to get people to be willing to receive services?
So it was 100% anonymous. Not all cops believe that, but it was, what you talked about in your wellness check-in was 100% anonymous. I know as the supervisor, after the check-ins, all I received was an anonymized report that said, this is, things are going well, or, we referred one person for financial services. We referred one person for, marriage counseling, whatever. It was a very anonymized report, because as a supervisor, I wanted to know what, if my people were okay, what I needed to, how I needed to interact. I didn't know who it was, and that was fine.
But is there a trend? Is there resources that need to be provided? Is there
a trend? Yes.
Is there rampant alcoholism in my organization? Is there rampant concerns? Are people not getting enough rest? Are people not, right? Or could scheduling I've worked in labs where we were on shifts because of the work. So, if everybody's sleepless, maybe we shouldn't be rotating their shifts every 2 weeks. I did work somewhere that did that, which is horrible for human beings to be able to sleep. And then lack of sleep aggravates everything else. So I love the fact that you get at least the trends so that you can evaluate.
Exactly. What are the trends? And in my case, it was overwhelming workload was the biggest stressor. So
they did tell you specifically what the stressors were.
In general, yes. And so then it was my job as a supervisor to try to put processes and procedures in place to talk to my supervisors, to talk about ways to help mitigate those stressors. We ended up also doing group discussions about things like parenting as an ICAC investigator, or how does this affect your relationships at home? There were people in my work unit who were having marital issues, for lack, if we really want to talk about it, they literally did not want to go home and have sex with their spouse because they were watching kids get raped all day. So there were, we would have group discussions, and even if everyone didn't talk, it helps people make a connection that, maybe they aren't the only one feeling that way. So we had group discussions, we had training, resiliency training, we watched webinars from NW3C. Nick had a webinar at one time called Parenting as an ICAC Investigator, and we would watch that and then talk about it. And so there was, all of these things were free except for the wellness check-ins. Our group discussions were led by our peer support personnel or mental health professionals from our Office of Public Safety Support. So we were using a lot of free resources in order to create, this resiliency and wellness culture. I will tell you, over time, it helped. We had people who were suicidal that did speak out, that did, I guess I know that we're not here to necessarily talk about this particular program, but there are ways to implement budgetary friendly things that will help a work unit.
So let's talk about just some but let's talk like easy budget, right? Because I'll tell you that the easiest budget thing I would make sure my team did is and this is going to sound super simple, if you don't have to view the audio and video at the same time, don't. Like, super simple. Now, many of the tools have a wellness feature that allow you to do audio or video only. Back in the day, we did it the old fashioned way. We would turn off our monitor and we would listen to the audio with a stopwatch so that we could put the timestamps, because we would have to marry things up between the audio and the video. So this was our old school way. Stopwatch, listen to the audio, take your notes, put that away, do something else for a couple of minutes. Then you take your headphones off, you play the video. So again, old school way of turning off the audio or the video. And then you take your notes, and then you looked at again with the stopwatch, and then you compared your notes to get a full comprehensive understanding. But then you were only looking at your notes when you were putting together the understanding. So you were breaking down the audio from the video from the contextual, which is when you were looking at your notes of everything that you took. And then sometimes your notes would force you to go back to one or the other. Okay, now I need to go back to the video and look at this or the audio. But then you had your timestamp, so you didn't have to play through the whole video. You would just go to a second before that time to a second after. And there is a zero cost effective method of, and again, this exists in a lot of tools right now, but that's exactly how I would deal with a lot of the noxious content I had to deal with, and how I taught my examiners on my team to strategize to deal with it, because there is never a need. And if there is a need to look at both at the same time, you're going to identify it through that process. But seldom did we need to do both simultaneously if we did that. And actually, I feel like this sounds weird. I feel like I could actually pick up on more because I was more focused. I was either just listening or just watching. And so I could make more notes, and I still had the full context. But there's one strategy. So there's a freebie. What do you got, Kim?
I think one thing that I've known several agencies to do is they would actually separate the different types of crimes that they were working with in their laboratory, and then make sure that, they would, kind of, filter, which ones that examiners were doing. So if you had to, spend 2 weeks on a particular, CSAM case, then, maybe the next case that you're going to work is not going to be something that you're actually looking at something like that. Maybe it's going to be a financial crime. And so I think that's one good thing. But I also think that there are numerous reasons why this is very difficult in order to manage it and to come up with good strategies. And one of the things I think is because when a lot of these digital forensics units started, they started because they had ICAC money. And if you have ICAC money, it is because you need to investigate ICAC crimes. Most of the time, and Abby, I know this is true, was it true in your lab, is that you ended up getting other types of crimes infiltrated in what you were doing as well. But it also gave an opportunity for maybe some other groups to do those crimes. Like, for example, maybe you had a drug enforcement group that was taking care of the drug crimes. I mean, even, later down the road from, looking at those phones or dealing with those phones, they may not have been something that you ended up looking at or dealing with. So that may have cut into the types of crimes that you were actually, doing, and to where you had the worst crimes that were in your laboratory. So it made it more difficult to separate out, those different types of crimes that examiners were doing. It's funny though, you said some strategies. And so when I first started in digital forensics many years ago with state police, I remember the sergeant who hired me, sweet human. And I remember whenever he called to tell me that I'd gotten the job, and he said, how do you feel about looking at, basically he was asking me about, online child exploitation, and he felt about looking at that. And I was like, I've never looked at it. How would I know how I feel about looking at it?
But that's a really good point. People don't know how they're going to react. Oh.
An answer.
So you don't know, which makes it even harder when you're trying to get people in these positions. You don't know who is going to have an issue, or at what point that they're going to have an issue, or what's going to trigger them, or when this is going to be an issue, or if it's even the CSAM that ends up doing it for them. Maybe it's, there's other things that are just like you've described, horrible, horrible crimes that we've had to look at and see, and, responded to school shootings, all kinds of things that are just awful to have to deal with. And then you add on top of that the constant backlog,
Right.
just constantly. You never feel like you are done. You never feel like you can get finished with what you're needing to do.
And you know how evil it is. So, like, one of the subjects that I sometimes have conversations with other people, and I'm like, I don't think you understand the evils and horrors that forensics examiners have seen, and how much it just skews our view of the world. I know that inherently most people are not evil, but inherently most of the devices I get are, if that makes sense, right?
It makes
yes,
100%
we definitely get victim devices where there's a normal person on the other end who's not doing something egregious. But the majority of the things I've seen in my profession are evil. With the exclusion of the year that I did financial crimes, the rest of my career has been just, people doing bad, very, very evil stuff. So I think that we have to acknowledge that. And I like something you said, Kim. You never know when it's going to trigger at what time. I had an examiner who had no problem with the content until he got married. And you know what? He was really, really strong at developing his own tools. So we actually just moved him into a development role where he just developed tools for us because he had so much knowledge about mobile forensics. But we made him just a standalone. You know what? He's just going to develop tools, and we're just going to give him data for when we know we need to write a parser or this or that. But sometimes people have life changes, and I've seen that. I've also noticed the what I like to call the 2-year mark, which is usually like when people go, I can't do this for the rest of my life, or they go, I can't see myself doing anything else because nothing else I ever do in my life will matter. And I feel like I don't know if you've
that's also a lot of pressure.
Same, but that's what people. But I find that like right at the 2-year mark, people go either one way or the other. They're like, this is not for me. I did it. I just But yeah, having kids. Having kids changes things. Having a case where someone in some way reminds you of someone in your family or someone you love. And I think we've all had that happen to us. Like where you just get triggered, and it doesn't have to be a doppelganger. Like it's just something about this child, a mannerism or whatever, or any person, any victim. It reminds you of somebody you care about. And that can be like extremely heavy.
Well, I think also is that even if that does remind you of someone or of something, it may not be obvious at that moment.
Yes.
Because it may be that you keep remembering about it, or it keeps coming up, or, the 4th time or the 10th time or the 200th time that you have to look at this video, that it's going to, it's going to remind you of whatever. But it's not, there's no method or formula to this. And you said something else about when examiners get started. Again, when examiners get started in this, if you're working for government, if you are starting for government, then you are doing CSAM cases, right?
Yeah, you are.
So it's a trade-off. It's a trade-off where you're like, oh, I have to look at this awful stuff, but look at this cool job I have. Oh my gosh, I love this from a technical perspective. I love learning this. I love learning that. And you're really good at it. And then you've invested yourself from a career perspective, technically, from a time perspective, mentally, emotionally, everything. You have invested yourself until you get to the point where you're like, oh my gosh, this is awful. This is the worst crap ever that somebody should ever have to look at.
That's a good point. Yes.
Yeah.
And then you get to wherever it is when you get to that point, and then you're like, oh well, do I say something at this point? Oh shoot, should I change careers? Oh no, should I ask to go do something else? What was that tipping point? And you may not, there may not be an obvious.
It might not be obvious. Yeah. And sometimes the trauma comes way unexpected at a different time. I know that sounds weird, but you could be doing something completely benign. You're not near the office, you're on vacation, you're on your personal time, and something happens and you like snap to, you get triggered. That's the PTSD. And you don't know what's going to set it off. And I mean, I remember, like, I was watching a movie that had nothing nefarious in it with my spouse, and there a little girl came on the scene. I said, if he, and I like jumped to, like, I suddenly like got real, and my husband's like, are you okay? And I'm like, no, I gotta actually turn this off. And I realized it was just like old casework set up a trigger that just got just this, whatever it was about this one character in a fictitious movie. But I've also seen things like that happen in real life. Like, something about a situation, it could be what a door looks like. Like, it sounds weird, but things that you thought were like deep in your memory from casework years ago can suddenly just like trigger like that. And so sometimes it's not even the resources you need in the lab, or, you know, the things and the tools like taking automated breaks, right? I know one lab I was in once, and their laptops would freeze on them every so many minutes. I think it was like 15 or 30 minutes that it couldn't work. And I was like, that would annoy the piss out of me. It was a wellness feature, but I was like, if I'm in a mental space where my brain is going and I'm getting something, because it didn't matter what they were working on. So if I'm in the hex and I just figured out a pattern and I'm trying to carve it, and then suddenly my computer froze on me, I'd probably break something about that.
That would, yeah. We all get in a zone and don't want to be stopped. You know, I think there's probably, I love the fact that they were trying, you know, but there's probably better ways to do that, you know. I know, you know, we would have a lot of fun in our office, and, you know, whether it was playing cornhole in the hallway, and if you wanted to come out and play for 20 minutes, you could. If you were in the middle of something, then no, don't, you know. Just eating lunch together and taking an actual break. You know, eating lunch as a group. You know, and
outside.
Going
outside.
Absolutely.
I know I whispered that. Going out, like, literally, I worked in a windowless lab for a lot of my career. No windows. Like, going outside and seeing the sun can do miraculous things.
It really can.
Health.
Even when I'm at home working during the day, and I'm not looking at noxious content, but I'll walk out on my back deck for 5 minutes, and it does a world of good, just, you know, for your mental state at that moment.
And I want to say, if you're listening to this and your first reaction is, you know what, I can't continue doing this to myself, I'm going to say there are other jobs in this field. You can move into financial crimes, incident response, go to an organization that doesn't deal with noxious content. You could go become a teacher, professor at a university, work for a vendor. Like, there are lots of other, if you're good at code, you could go into software development. There's a lot of other things you can do that still hone in on the skills you've built. So don't feel like you have to throw those skills away and go work in a completely different field. Don't feel you have to go to school to become a nurse. I don't know, but don't feel that pressure that you have to throw away your entire career and your life's work. That, like Kim was mentioning, you know, this is what I do. So there's, if it really is, there are other opportunities. And I've mentored a lot of career switchers in my time, and some of them actually have told me that is the reason that they're switching careers, is because they just don't want to deal with that content anymore. And oftentimes because they had kids.
Yeah. Having kids is a big trigger for a lot of people. You know, one of the coolest things that I think there is along the lines that you're talking is in the industry, you know, a lot of, like you said, a lot of the tool providers, so many of the people that work for the tool providers used to be examiners, and they made a career transition for exactly what we're talking about. And I think it's cool because they understand, they're still dealing with they're still part of the mission in my
100%.
mind. They're still part of the mission, just in a different way. And they're helping law enforcement with their mission, and but they also understand what law enforcement has been through. And so I do love the fact that there are these other options, and they're still meaningful.
So I'll just echo on top of what Jessica said a moment ago. Don't feel like that there's nothing else for you to do, or that you got to stay in that spot, right? But if you've even gotten a little bit even further down that way of thinking, it's not just, oh no, I don't know if I can change careers. You may be even more to the point of, I don't know if I can do this anymore, or I don't know if I can just go on, or I don't know I don't know how to do things. Reach out to someone.
Yes.
Please reach out to someone, even if your group does not have someone designated. Debbie, I know that you had a couple of resources that you had shared a few different times with us about some groups that are definitely there and available.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will say that if you reach out to virtually anyone who has been in your shoes, they're going to do that. But there are several organizations that provide free wellness and resiliency training. There's the Innocent Justice Foundation provides a program called SHIFT for the ICAC task forces, and it teaches grounding techniques and really super easy breathing techniques and meditation. So while wellness and resiliency skills can't necessarily change the stressors, that's a different project. You can learn how to react. If your heart is racing, if you're starting to have some thoughts that you don't want to have, there are grounding techniques and breathing techniques and meditation techniques and things that you can do, like walking outside, to just shift your thinking in the moment and decrease the stress. So, and that's, a lot of what we're talking about, shifting the stress in the moment. Do what you can in the moment to make your body feel better, to make your mind feel better. There are organizations that train for free. Yoga for First Responders is one of them. And like I said, Innocent Justice is one of them. So
I had an examiner that worked next to me for years, and because we'd worked next to each other for so long, we were, I guess, kind of in tune whenever one of us would get aggravated or something else. But he would usually say it to me, and not really me saying it to him, but he would say, just walk away for a minute. Just get up.
And there's no shame. There's no shame. There's nothing wrong with getting up and walking away. There's no shame in it. Everyone in this industry deals with this. Everyone understands it. You're not alone. If you need, the suicide hotline is 988. If you call 911 because you can't remember 988, they'll redirect you. But the suicide hotline is 988. Keep that number in your mind if you ever know anyone else who needs it. I just can't stress that enough. We all understand. We know that those horrors are out there, and we applaud you for the work that you are doing to help combat those horrors, and we thank you. But you don't need to be a sacrifice for those horrors. And we all need to remember that. We need to be supportive of it. And we need to independently ensure that we're creating a culture of openness. If you are a leader and you are not looking up the list of resources at this end of this episode, so in the show notes, there's a list of resources of free mental health resources for you to share with your team, you're not doing your job. You need to share and look at these resources. Your most important thing as a leader is to your team, not to the cases. Take care of your team so they can work the cases. Take care of your people. Sorry to go off a little bit about that. Like, let's not lose amazing people to the horrors of the mind because of what we do to save innocent people and to protect people. So at the end of the day, please, please, please take this topic seriously. That's why we're doing an episode on this. Please look at these resources. And look, you can reach out to not just the people in your office. If there is something wrong in your culture, please reach out to other examiners. They will help you. We are all here together. So if there's something, if we're saying this and you're listening to everything Debbie was just saying about what her amazing team did at GBI and how they really took it seriously, and you're like, it's not like that in my lab. You don't know what it's like. It's not like that in my lab. Because I'll tell you, that's what I would say to you about my old lab. Then you either need to slide these resources to your management, and if you don't feel you can slide these resources to your management because the issue is that much culturally, talk to someone else. Get a hold of another examiner. Go on the Discord, go on the listserv, IASIS, HTCIA. Find someone who you relate to and say, hey, can we talk?
You know, you bring up something, you can be a leader. Like, you know, we talk about leadership and executives having to make the decision to implement these things and put these things in place. And that's the best case scenario. But if that's not going to happen, each and every person can be a leader in their work unit and talk about it. Kim, one of the things that I loved about what you said is that your coworker looked at you and realized that maybe you were having a hard time with something and spoke up to you about it. Hey, hey, step away for a minute. That is the kind of culture that we can all create, whether executives or leadership implements that or not. We can all do that ourselves.
And maybe that's the responsibility we have to each other. I love that you brought that up, Debbie. I love that your colleague did that for you, Kim. But maybe that's exactly what we need to do. Maybe it's the onus of each one of us to make sure we're turning around and saying, why don't we go for a walk? Why don't we take 5 minutes out of the office and then go just talk about the weather? Go talk about anything else. But maybe the best thing we do for each other, for each other's mental wellness, and just by doing that, we create a culture of I think you're right. We can change the culture from within, every single one of you in the lab.
100%.
And then share the resources with your management. They might not be listening to this podcast. Managers don't necessarily, they're dealing with management people-y things. They're not necessarily, they're doing paperwork. They may not understand what you're seeing every day.
That is another good point. If we don't tell them what our stressors are, they often don't know. And the first step is to educate them. And yes, there are resources at the end of this, in the show notes. Some of them are from IACP about how to create a peer support program. There are all sorts of resources about wellness. There's even in the show notes, there's a grant that you can apply for from, I believe it's DOJ, or I think it's a COPS grant that will assist and provide funding for wellness programs, for the development of wellness programs. In the show notes, there is a resource about how 11 other agencies developed their wellness program, like how they did it. So you don't have to reinvent the wheel. Provide these to your leadership and tell them how important it is. Things don't happen overnight. Things don't happen overnight in government. So, but you have to start the process or it never will happen. And in the meantime, be a leader in your own work unit.
But it doesn't cost anything for you to talk to each other. It doesn't cost anything for people to take a 5-minute break to go on a walk. It doesn't cost anything to separate the audio from the video. It doesn't cost anything to change culture. It's just doing it. And if it's that bad, like if in your organization you're like, why don't you take a walk and take a break from that? And somebody else turns around and goes, well, aren't you, and calls you a negative word, insinuating your masculinity or your stepworthness or anything else, then now you've identified another problem. And now that problem needs to be rectified. because now, and I do want to say something else. I know we've spoken a lot about noxious content. Debbie, you brought up earlier the number one problem in your stressor was the actual workload.
Overwhelming workload.
Overwhelming workload. And I want to say something for people who are not in law enforcement or anything else, but are still doing investigative work. If you're working as a forensics examiner who's working in heavy incident response, especially as a consultant, every single day you're working somebody else's company's worst day, and it's fire after fire after fire, and it's on call after on call. And that also requires coping strategies. So you're not off the hook in corporate exams, and you're not off the hook. You need to think about your people's wellness as well. Just because they're not looking at noxious content doesn't mean that there aren't the stressors of getting it right. How we treat people and the culture we create is absolutely critical. So just take care of your people and take care of each other.
Well said.
Well, thank you both. Debbie, thank you for all your resources. I just want to throw a mention that Debbie does do quite a few wellness talks at different conferences. If you're at any of the ICAC conferences coming up later this year, Northwest ICAC, Florida ICAC conference, or any other time of year, if you're at any of the other events, even a lot of the vendors have taken to having wellness topics. Check out those wellness topics. I know you want to get all the technical insights you can, and you want to make sure you understand that newest chat app that's being used, or the newest app that's being used to conceal content, or the newest encryption, or the newest acquisition technique, but don't leave out the wellness from your organization. So those topics are equally important, actually, if not more so. Well, thanks everyone. We've really enjoyed having you here. We'll see you on the next episode.